Welcome to the 4th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors Conference.
All right. We ready to get started? How's everybody feeling today? Nice. It is a panel on hip-hop, so I should probably start with some call and response stuff, right? Gonna divide you in halves, the left side. No, I'm kidding. All right, so welcome to the panel on So You Want to License Hip-Hop. I want to get into introducing our panelists a little bit. I think we got a really great lineup here, pretty diverse group of experts in the field. And we'll start with me, just because I'm the one speaking right now. My name is Mike Jansen. I own a company called The Greater Goods, so we are a third-party licensor. So we're pitching to people like Jen, who's next to me as a music supervisor. So that's our job. I do come from a pretty long love relationship with hip-hop. It was probably my first love musically and something I was really influenced by as a youngster, and now I'm working on quite a bit on a licensing front. So to my right, Jen Ross, owner of a company called Grand Plan, has been music supervising for over 10 years and is currently, I think we just confirmed this probably, unofficially, the most hip-hop songs in a TV show ever. And that's concurrent right now. Empire, Power, and Star, all ongoing projects right now and using a ton of hip-hop music. Next to Jen, indie hip-hop artist and entrepreneur Thurz from Inglewood, California. Yeah, I came across Thurz from Red Bull, I think, initially, and slowly started to realize he's a bit of a secret weapon to a lot of music supervisors that I know. Currently working with people like Dr. Dre on the writing side, but also writing for shows and for movies you might just not know it. You know, so we'll get into that a little bit. Next to Thurz is Gary Greenberg. Yeah. Listen, Gary has been a lawyer for quite a while and has focused specifically on a number of hip hop clients. He started out as a drummer and still drums, and I was really impressed to learn this, was drumming for Sugar Free and Bone Thugs and Harmony. Yeah. So that's also a reason why I wanted to work with him. And currently working with producers who are producing for Kendrick Lamar, for Drake, for Travis Scott. So Gary Greenberg. And last but not least, a fellow Canadian, Adele Ho on the end. Also music supervisor, moved here from Canada to start interning at Neophonic, has since gone on to Creative Control, working with Joel C. High on a bunch of the Medea projects, on the Honey film, and more recently on the Warren G documentary G-Funk, which if you haven't seen, it's phenomenal. So that's kind of it. That's how we roll out the introductions. I want to jump right into the sort of theme. Obviously, right now we're celebrating the 45th birthday of hip hop this year, which is a big deal. You know, hip hop's over the hill, right? But doing better than ever and being used a ton. Also, the #1 music in North America. Licensing is really starting to reflect that, which is a cool thing to see. And the goal of this is to discuss, I think a lot of the things that come up in music supervision are the issues with clearing hip hop, but I also want to try and really focus on some solutions. So I want to give a really balanced conversation here. So I wanted to start with Jen, just because I think you've had the most experience recently, but also the most experience as a music supervisor. And just curious to see in your 10 plus years in music supervision, how have you seen this trend with hip hop pick up sort of from the beginning when you got into it to now?
It's incredible what's happened. Up until about 5-ish years ago, hip hop was something that was used almost piecemeal in both film and TV, right? So you would have a scene or two, maybe occasionally, that had some hip hop, but you didn't have it be part of the constant tonal landscape of shows or film. That you really didn't have things that was what was predominantly driving it. And it changed as time has moved on. I would say last 5 years, not trying to tote my child, but Empire definitely helped. And I can say that when we started Empire, I remember when we were working the pilot, a lot of kind of questionable responses that I would get at first when I would say, well, it's this hip-hop driven drama that's a musical, and people would just kind of look at me like, what? It's incredible to see what has changed since then, because I feel very fortunate. It is a wonderful genre that is incredibly narrative. I mean, look, it's poetic by nature. Let's start with that, right? So to be able to see this used in film and TV now, predominantly in a few shows, a few films, like it's becoming something that is becoming more of the norm. And that's amazing, because quite frankly, it really wasn't until a few years ago that you would hear that. And now I see it places, I hear people asking for it when I talk to people about other projects. It's a phenomenal thing to see it get its rightful space. That being said, as we all know, it's a very challenging genre to be working with, because it's not always easy to clear. Or I shouldn't even say easy to clear, it's not always clearable, is really the best way to put it. So it's something that it's driving itself more creatively and finding its place in the environment, but it's still something that sometimes people get a little apprehensive to really go down that rabbit hole, because there's challenges, and we all, as music supervisors, have budgetary restrictions, timelines. So it's something that it's amazing to see what has happened. I think that it has also gotten not easier, but it's a different landscape. Every year, there's more and more solutions and more people that come to you who are understanding and want to help find a solution. And that's a wonderful thing that's also changed.
Gary, are you seeing a similar thing? Also, a long history with hip hop. When did licensing, sync licensing specifically, become more prevalent in your line of work?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what Jen said. Somebody told me once that one of the first, if you call it hip hop, songs that really broke through was when the Black Eyed Peas song was used in that Apple commercial, and that really busted it out, because before then, licensing, use of music and licensing was almost considered like a sellout. And hip hop relies so much on street credibility that the last thing you would want is your music to be seen as soft somehow, or being in some kind of a sellout type of usage. But I think the bottom line is that as the music industry has evolved, money's money. And everybody realizes, including hip hop artists particularly, that where am I going to make my money? And if I can make money licensing songs, put it in a diaper commercial. I don't care. Just get me paid.
The entrepreneurial spirit in hip hop has always been
exactly.
Yeah.
So I've got more and more of my clients are saying, what can I do to get my songs in film and TV and commercials, because they're getting hip to how much money there is.
And what do you tell them when they ask you that question repeatedly?
I tell them that it's a good time to do that, but that the key is, like Jen said, is to make it as easy as possible for music supervisors to use your material. Like, don't sample, don't put features on songs that you want to have, don't have 20 writers on the song. Like, try and make it as simple. If you're going to write music for sync usage, maybe you want to simplify it down. It's different than making a song for your record, where if you got to have a sample, got to have a couple of features to make it work, that's fine. But create music specifically that you know is going to be more clearable, if that's an area that you want to get into, and people are doing it.
You mentioned samples, and I wanted to, obviously we could have a whole panel on samples and the difficulties that arise when artists are sampling. As someone who grew up on hip hop, as a fan, I still love sample-based music, and I tell people as a profession, I'm allergic to it. Like, I have to stay away from it. I can just listen to it, and that's it, and I never want to touch it. But Adele, I know, working on the G-Funk documentary specifically, it's, you're going back through catalogs, you're going back through Warren G, through Snoop Dogg, through Dr. Dre, very early days for these guys. And, the trials and tribulations of sampling, maybe people didn't get quite as much forewarning, or they didn't care, or whatever the case was. What was it like going back through and trying to license songs that are now going on, 20 years old or something like that?
So being a fan of hip hop, it was amazing to kind of dig in. Work-wise, it was a lot. And A lot of those, especially during that time, a lot of those catalogs have either been, part of buyouts, so the paper trail doesn't really follow the sampling. It's not very clear. Even Business Affairs would say to stay away from it. We had one song that it was the one that could not come out of the film. It was part of also telling the story. And I digged so deep that I ended up finding on YouTube 1 or 2 videos, and whoever had posted it just happened to post the liner notes that then explained what the 3 samples were. And when I approached all majors, none of them had even been aware of it, even though at some point there had been a deal. So it was, doing the research, and both Joel and myself are both fans of hip hop and, have listened to it a lot. So actually knowing the musical history, not just, but like knowing kind of who the players were, made it easier to kind of track people down, because a lot of people, like I would find songwriters and, I couldn't find anything about them because they're now, the rights have reverted back to themselves. So knowing what their stage name was and kind of connecting those dots made it possible to then, track them down. And then with shows like Empire and then films like Straight Outta Compton, the great thing is there's renewed interest. So a lot of these catalogs are now, people are seeing the value that's in them and they're being brought back up to speed. And like Death Row catalog, a lot of people think it's actually difficult to clear. And it's now owned by E1, and they essentially, when they purchased it, did a full inventory. So there's certain things like that now with this new interest, it's now making it a lot easier.
How many of the songs that you were coming across for a film like that, it always surprises me, I think, when you go back to an album, say like De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising, you can't find it online at all. It's samples on top of samples on top of samples and an interlude with more samples. So it's just not, and none of it was cleared. And it's Hall & Oates and it's the Turtles. I mean, it's crazy. It's incredible. It's a masterpiece, but just a complete minefield when it comes to the legalities of it. How many of the songs that you went back to license could you not get, or what's that process like for you?
When we first saw what was mapped out, and obviously because it is a documentary, there is a story that's historical that we have to tell. So there's certain songs that have to be a part of it. Both of Joel and I were knowing that we had a huge challenge ahead of us, but it ended up working out better than we went into it, because a lot of things, like I said, we were able to kind of, it was a lot of research, but finding the right players. There were songs though that you wouldn't expect necessarily to be difficult, that just, you'd be missing 4%, but you're still missing that 4%, or they weren't exactly sure what it was.
I see Jen nodding a lot with the 4%.
Yeah. Yeah,
usually 2% for me, which is even worse.
I heard it was Tupac's weed carrier for a long time. That was the 2%. But anyway.
I've literally had one song that could not be cleared because it was 1.98 that we were missing, and no one could find it. So what we ended up doing is, and part of telling the story is, for a couple tracks, what we did is we actually went to the source. And it actually helped, in my opinion, to tell the story, because for music fans, it was cool to kind of isolate what the samples were and see how it inspired the end result. And, we would mention the song, just didn't play it. And then for people who weren't informed, it also allowed them to be like, oh, I totally recognize this. I didn't realize this was, sampled in.
Cool. To pivot a little bit, Thurz, I want to throw it to you and find out, first of all, I mean, this is going to be an admission, how many of your songs are sample-based, but also, yeah, it's fine. You don't give me like an exact number, but I'm sure at some point in your career you were sampling songs, and was there any knowledge of the sort of legalities of that? Because I know as a kid, I never thought about it. That was just sort of what you did, right? Like that was, hey, yeah, we take this sample, and I still deal with people now who are like, it's all good, and I'm like, that's not a legal term, I've asked Gary, he's confirmed, like I'm not going to put, and we work with a label called Mass Appeal that just co-released a Nas album that Kanye produced that is just, nobody knows yet, that there's a lot of things that are unconfirmed. So curious, A, to see what your perspective is on sampling, if you still do it, and then B, when you first came across licensing as a viable opportunity for your music?
Okay. What was the first question again?
Samples.
Samples. As far as being a creative, I'm never opposed to like rapping over something that has a sample. You know, it's all about the feeling for me. Every song that we write just wants to come across. I want it to come across to the listener as authentic and something that they can relate to. So if it has a sample or not, it's just all about the sake of the song or the integrity of the song and making it the best as possible. My first experience with the legalities of having samples in music occurred in like 2008. I was in this group called You and I, and we won this MTV Breakout Award, and it was like a contest between a few different independent bands and acts, and we had this song that got selected to be premiered on MTV. It's called Beautiful Day, and it had a sample in it, and we had to perform it during this contest, and we got like a red flag because, you know, one of the guys or one of the staff members on the MTV crew were asking us if it had a sample. And they said that we couldn't perform it if it had a sample or we had to reproduce it. So we had like 48 hours to reproduce and record the song, and then we had to go and perform it. So, you know, experiencing that turmoil with that deadline or that time frame, we kind of got the idea that maybe we should stop using samples if we want to make some.
But did you stop? I mean, you said, and I respect it. Like your creative process, you're right. Like you should make the art that you want, right? So, but did that experience turn you away from sampling entirely?
Initially, it turned me away. There was a period where I didn't use any samples, and then just kind of like carrying along. I was like, man, I just want to make something. You know, I just want to like make stuff that feels good. Some stuff is not going to be serviceable, and then there's going to be stuff that can be used. And, you know, if there's unique situations where I have to create for a specific show or scene, I can do that, you know, in a short time frame. So,
and are you writing and producing?
I wouldn't say I'm producing, but I
guess producing?
Yeah, exactly.
You're getting your ditty on.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so sync licensing, when was the first opportunity? When did you start to take notice? Because that's why I really wanted to have you on this. Aside from being a prolific indie artist, you're somebody that I started to see in meetings. I'm going into music supervisors and they're like, oh, do you know Thurz? I'm like, yeah, I do. You know this guy too? Like, oh, cool. And it seemed like you were this kind of secret weapon to some people. Yeah. And I'm sure that didn't happen overnight. So what was the first taste that you got, like something where you're like, hey, this could be cool?
The first taste of licensing that I got was on a CSI show. I did this project called LA Ride. It's like my first solo project, and I was able to get DJ Khalil to produce this record. And then I got one of my favorite rappers of all time. Also samples? Yeah, well, not anymore. Not anymore. He does. Dead, by the way. He does jam sessions, and he gives you like a feel of a sample for a lot of his production. But the first song we got placed together was with, DJ Khalil and Black Thought. It was on a CSI show. And the amount that we got, I was like, this is kind of interesting. I would like to have a lot more of these opportunities for this amount of money.
That's that hip hop entrepreneurial spirit again. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So that was my first taste. And then,
and that came to you, right? Like you weren't pitching it there was no one representing it or anything like that. Like
my guy John Christensen, I think he hooked that one.
Was a music supervisor.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, he was working with Hit the Ground Running, and they were doing like the CSI show, and he had my catalog at the time, and he pitched it, and they loved it. It fit the energy of the scene, and once I saw the amount, I was like, I got to do this a lot more. Like, this is where it's at.
Jen, I wanted to ask you also, like, kind of in relation to that. I mean, I think everybody knows the major label artists and stuff like that, and the more recognizable names that you might be tapping for a show like Empire or Power. But obviously, we've discussed some of the challenges budget-wise and that kind of thing, clearance-wise, whatever it is. What sort of solutions have you been finding? The independent hip-hop scene, are you seeing that develop a lot more? Are people getting savvier in this space?
To a degree. I think the best way to put it, honestly, again, is to a degree, because you do have artists that are still sampling, and then you also have, God bless, you have a lot of people who are independent at one moment, and then the next moment they're not, or there's writers that are on the track that are most definitely not independent. And so you're talking to somebody and it happens from the best of them. I cannot tell you how many times we have been deep in clearing something to find out that 2% suddenly has a deal at Warner Chappell or BMG. And now all of a sudden this thing that you loved and you were championing is now a little bit tricky. And you have to do that. Hey, everybody, please rally, please call. Please try to get them to agree to this because we're breaking precedent. And it's understandable on the other side of the fence for the majors to make this compromise because once you open the door, it's hard to toe the line. But that is one of the biggest things that, again, I think the biggest solution for any of us is transparency. Try to be as absolutely clear and honest towards what you're dealing with and make sure if somebody that you wrote, that you had on a track turns out that they do in fact have a deal, you find out at a later date, there's no shame in telling somebody at a later date. It's horrible to find out when you're deep in it and then you're suddenly thrown by it. And outside of that, it really, again, because this is more of a predominant genre that is being used in film and TV, the amount that is in the space right now is overwhelming. I cannot even tell you how many people come on a daily basis, and it's all levels from very, very indie. You have people that are extremely, extremely indie, and then you have people who are genuinely indie in the sense of they are out there. They are people that are legitimate artists who have been trying to get themselves on that come up, and they do have actual street cred, and you want to be able to use them. And a good amount, especially on Power, we do use a lot of indies. On Power, we're really fortunate because we have the space to do it, and we really try to champion that. It's a little harder when you're in a network space because, again, network spaces are looking for a little bit more 4 quadrants. So we tend to run a little bit more with the major label on network shows, whereas when you have something like Power, we tend to lean a little bit more on the indie space.
And authenticity and that sort of integrity has come up a couple times. I think we've kind of all said it, and it seems like to be a core part of hip hop. From anyone's perspective here, I know that a lot more people are starting to write for sync, and the libraries as well have been increasing the different variety of styles and stuff like that they're taking on. Is that a solution that you guys are going to often? Adele, have you guys used that in, say, Honey, for example,
Sure.
or Medea projects?
Yeah, because some of the hip hop stuff is just what people want, the future, they want Drake, whatever. It's not necessarily affordable, or it's not maybe clearing at that time. But there's a lot of great resources through, libraries and stuff. I think people have to look more into that because price point wise, and it's also fun when it's someone that's, not well known, and we can kind of pitch that as well. So we've definitely relied on it. And especially if it's a one-stop, that's perfect.
And so would you advise hip hop artists? I don't know if there's any hip hop artists in the audience, but is that something that's advised when people are looking? And Gary, maybe you can speak to this agreement wise. I don't know how many library offers you've looked at where an artist can say, hey, listen, I control both sides of this. Maybe we should define what one stop is. That's something that I'm still defining for people constantly, where, one stop, just to sort of clarify, and we can all have a very distinct idea of what this is, but meaning that you control both sides. So I only have to call you for 100% of master and 100% of publishing. So if you have a co-owner or a co-writer or something like that, unless they signed all of that over to you, you don't necessarily have that as a one-stop. Some people have told me, hey, well, we have 100% master on this, and we did a publishing deal with Cobalt, or we did a publishing deal with BMG where they administer our publishing, but everything has to go through me, so I'm the one person that you need to clear it with, so I clear it one stop. And it's like, well, actually, if you own the master, I would do the master agreement with you, but because BMG or Cobalt are your administrator, they would be doing the agreement for your publishing, so you don't actually have it. It may, seem like it, but in this instance, it would still be 2 agreements. So one stop means one agreement, and that's one person who's going to sign off on everything. Gary, are you ever coming across library sort of agreements, or what is the sort of range that you're seeing deal-wise for independent artists looking for representation? Because part of the authenticity also the trust in the people that you're working with, right? So you're saying that there's a lot of people reaching out to you. Some are very indie, some are credible, but how do they get past the that background check?
Right. Well, that part of the game is really interesting because it's not just libraries; it's all these music houses, sync agents, whatever you call them. It's a huge booming business out there in the sync world, and the deals are all over the place. The library deals, you have to give up ownership of your songs and your masters. So that's a little rugged. A lot of my hip hop people are not into giving up their stuff. They want to hold on to their stuff. That's that
really, entrepreneurial spirit again.
Exactly. So the library deals don't really go over well with them. But hiring a sync agent that'll pitch your stuff and just charge you a commission, everybody's cool with that. Everybody's cool with, hey, you make me money, you make money.
The sort of eat what you kill model. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm seeing an explosion in that area. And, I'm advising more of my independent hip hop artists to look into that because why not?
Yeah. Thurz, it seems like a bunch of people, you've really cultivated a lot of direct relationships. People have your phone number. I don't know if you've had any experience working with third-party agent kind of people representing your music, pitching you. Have you? Or, how are these opportunities coming about?
Yeah, as far as opportunities coming for sync, there were a lot of third-party companies that were helping out. Then as far as having direct contacts with people, just kind of networking in different scenes and meeting people and relationships, the most valuable thing, no matter what the business, it's all about who knows you and how reachable you are. So just networking and meeting people, people would seek me out at times as well, and just ask for music for certain opportunities, and I guess the turnover that I was able to get stuff back and the quality that we were able to provide, that kind of gave me a good rapport and allowed them to continually come back to me. So that's kind of how that worked out for me.
And how often are you writing for, is someone tapping you to write for a project? Because you're a pretty prolific writer, writing for other people and stuff like that. And that's a specific skill that not necessarily everybody has. Some people are artist forward and that's kind of what they do, but you have the ability to write for other people or say write for a show or a film. How often is that coming up versus somebody just saying, we want to license your music?
And there were opportunities at one point, every week. Sometimes we're getting 2 calls a week. But with the latest kind of workflow I've been in, I haven't been able to really commit to too many of those opportunities. But I'm always open to them, and they pay well. And yeah, they at one point it was 2 times a week, emails coming in from different people. I was like, okay, I like this idea. I could do this one. Oh, okay, I think I could complete this pretty fast. Or I'd see what producer was available that I can link up with.
So they're asking you to do the whole song. They're not necessarily sending you a track and saying, can you just rap on this?
They're just asking me to do a song, just send ideas. So
specifically, when I was doing the research, and I mean, you and I know each other almost outside of licensing, which is cool, but doing the research for this, I came across this Black Skinhead version or cover. I don't know what we want to call it necessarily.
Cover.
But I mean, if you look up Thurz on Spotify, you'll see that there's, the artwork is for Neighbors 2, the film, and it's, a cover version of Kanye's Black Skinhead, which is one of the most popular references, and I mean, it's a hip hop song, sort of a hybridish kind of thing, but that's a song that was getting referenced a ton, and I know everybody in this room has heard enough bootleg versions in a Budweiser commercial or whatever it is, where you're like, that's Black Skinhead's ugly step cousin. You know what I mean? It's just some C version of Black Skinhead, but they tapped you to actually do a cover of. Normally, when I'm hearing that, it's an instrumental. They're referencing this instrumental thing, but you actually re-rapped Kanye's lyrics. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I had a friend named Cousteau, Jock Cousteau. He's a big sneaker blogger, and he used to rap back in the day. He had a big scene in one movie a few years back, and he has a lot of relationships, and we've maintained our relationship. He had a relationship with the guys at Aperture, and he recommended myself and 2 other artists to come in for this opportunity, and they just wanted us to all in unison, rap Kanye's lyrics together. So it was kind of cool because I love that record. And that was pretty much how that happened. They reproduced the whole Kanye record and wanted to give it a marching band feel because, in Neighbors 2, they're on this college campus and dealing with these students. So that was their whole idea, to get that feeling across. And yeah, it worked out. It was really unique. They just kind of paid us for the work we did. It wasn't like a license or anything, but I did get a royalty because it's available on all digital platforms and they're selling it. And yeah, it was a cool opportunity.
And did you negotiate that yourself?
We spoke about it. It wasn't like a hard negotiation. Like, I need this.
Hey, I've got this amount of money. Cool? Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah, it was so unique. I'm like,
it's a cover, right? Like there's a limited amount of opportunity and it's just sort of a buyout thing.
So I was just down. I was like, okay, you guys are going to pay me now and I get to get something a little later. So I was down.
And Jen, how often is writing for the shows that you're on? How often is that coming up?
Constantly, to be terribly honest. Especially because sometimes, again, it's challenging to always be able to license certain things. So you have to be creative and you have to find different solutions. Obviously on Empire, there is a original song component. So that right there is something that is happening on a weekly basis, because every episode we have original songs that we do our own cast records. But frankly, it's something that across the board, sometimes you just not finding something specific out there that you just throw it to somebody and see what they could do. And sometimes when, certain things, the trick about music supervision as a whole, not to sidetrack, but you've got to be able to make a song bend to picture. And some things come really close, but they don't completely bend. So sometimes it really helps to be able to go to somebody and say, tonally, these are the things that are working. It's doing this, but it's not doing that. Could you do something? And sometimes that's a great solution when you're finding yourself in a place and you're having a problem and you've got to be able to clear something because you are mixing in a matter of a week and a half. You find a solution, and sometimes having people write absolutely takes care of that.
And how are you finding those writers? Are those people who were sort of built into the show? Because I know like Timbaland was a producer on Empire, I believe, right? And so is he pulling in obviously he has plenty of writers. Is he pulling in those people? Are you suggesting people? How does that work?
To be terribly honest, it's a committee. Especially when you have a show like that, there are obviously a lot of people who are approaching. It's a committee between me, the studio, the producers, and there's a lot of different people that we resource, and we resource people for different sounds. Certain people are really good at one thing, others are better at another. So we constantly have a pool that we tap into.
And I wanted to talk about the dynamics of hip hop a little bit as well, because I think coming up, a lot of hip hop, because we talked about it, sample based, it's sort of loop based, right? It's like, all right, we need a 16 bar kind of loop. And oftentimes there might be the dynamics that are missing. What are the sort of dynamics that you guys are looking for? Like just as a reference, Migos, right? One of the most popular hip hop groups in the world, but I'd argue that up until say Stir Fry or Walk It Like I Talk It, like there weren't a lot of songs that had the dynamics and sort of a catchy lyric. A lot of trap stuff, for example, is here. It's the same hi-hat. It's not a lot of dynamics. What are you guys looking for? Maybe Adele, I'll ask you what sort of stuff you're looking for in that realm.
It really depends on the project, obviously. Mumble rap has been in demand a lot.
But is that from like a sort of a credibility? Sorry to cut you off, but is that from like a credibility standpoint where you're like, hey, this is sort of what's popular right now and that's why we want to use it, versus it's right for the dynamics of the scene?
Definitely more what's popular, I find. And then you'll have, certain people who just are going to name whatever's on the top 40. Like I've had calls sometimes and, they're like, why is this song so expensive? I mean, it's Flow Rider. Like, has he done something, And it's like, well, no, he still commands a certain fee. So it'll be with what the trends are. And that's can be hard, especially if you're doing, we had a scene where it was like a college party and they wanted it to be really hyped up. But if you have that mumble rap, which is very, the tempo's a certain way, everyone's not going to be hyped up for when they had filmed it, and you have to kind of cut it in. So it really just depends. But the big ones that have come up, at least for us as reference, Drake is consistent, Future, Migos, Playboi Carti last year was a lot, and now everyone's gearing back towards like Kendrick.
And will they go for the cheaper Playboi Carti option? Or are they just after the like cultural cachet of licensing him?
Again, depends on the person. I've we've paid a lot for a song by big artists who really wasn't, there was another artist featured on the song who essentially took it over, and then the person would chime in during the refrain, but it was really about having that name involved on the project. But then there's been other times where we ended up finding a one-stop, so it was literally we, licensed the master and publishing through one licensor, and that ended up being a main title for one of our projects because it just fit really well and the quality was great. And obviously, when you can bring a song that works so well creatively and fits really under budget, that's for us, it's always a win.
I want to talk about features for a minute because that's also another thing that I think is really prevalent in hip hop and has almost influenced other genres. To kind of be a lead artist featuring somebody else. I don't think pop music or even country music or whatever it is that are doing that much more of that now. I'd like to think that they were directly influenced by the popularity of hip hop doing that. Gary, when you're looking at these types of agreements from a third-party position, there's a lot of labels that we've worked with who traditionally had 100% of those masters. Now I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I think it's more so in the digital and streaming age that people are seeing the value in masters. So they're kind of saying, hey, listen, if you're going to have 21 Savage on this song, they're going to lend a bunch of credibility to you. We need to do a side artist agreement. So you no longer, as the label releasing this song, have 100% of that master. And for someone like me who's pitching that song, and we were given Diplo's last EP, and he has a song with Drum on it. And Drum is RCA, I believe. Warner? Okay, Warner. It's not me. So that was kind of what I knew. It's like, I'm given this record. We traditionally had 100% master, and it's like, oh no, now you only represent 50% of this song on the master side. The other request has to go to Warner to clear Drum. And that's something I'm starting to see more of. Gary, are you negotiating a lot more of those kinds of things?
Yeah, I always try when I do a feature agreement to include the ability to license in the grant of rights that comes in, so I avoid that problem. But you see, the issue you're bringing up is another level, which is people make the mistake of thinking, well, I've gotten the rights from the featured artist, but the featured artist label also has to be part of that equation. And the featured artist label will often limit the rights they're giving you to their featured artist only to use on my record. So if I want to do something else, like license it for a film or TV, I got to go back to the label again. That's what you're saying, and get permission again. So there's really no way around that. I mean, people, if you have a feature on a record, like Adele just said, sometimes the feature is more the artist than the artist. So the artist label, depending on how big they are, I think they have a legitimate claim to say, we're going to co-own this master. We're going to let you use our artist on this as a feature. We want a stake in the master. I mean, that's no way around that sometimes.
Thurz. It's dead too. All right. I got a loud enough voice. We're good, right? You can hear me? Good? Oh, there's. All right, cool. We're collaborating, right? Cool, I like it. Yeah, featured artist. All right, cool.
So I wanted to hear from sort of both sides what the advice would be, so say and Gary, you can maybe speak to both sides of this, but the things that you kind of wish that both sides knew. I think we're covering a lot of the ground where there's, listing off a few of the things, samples and co-writes and these kinds of things and knowing your rights. I think I kind of want to start with Thurz, and ask, like, what is it that you would like the supervision community, licensing community to know about hip hop and how to approach it from an artist standpoint? I think we're talking a lot of the inside baseball on the buyer's side. I'm curious to see from your perspective, do you like what's happening right now? How do you like, being treated? What do you want that community to know?
There's a lot of opportunities that come in where they're referencing records. My only suggestion with that would be to be open to different ideas that might have similar elements, but it doesn't have to sound exactly like this record that you guys are referencing.
Call that temp love.
Yeah, and I find just difficulties in that. Other than that, I do like seeing hip hop placed in sitcoms and movies and all that, especially I like what Issa Rae is doing too. Like a lot of those opportunities that come.
Insecure, in
Yeah,
specific, yeah.
yeah. I like how she, gets a lot of. The show is based in Inglewood, so she goes and gets a lot of independent artists that are from the city, and she places their music in different scenes. And it's always cool to like hear a song that I might not have heard, or maybe hear a song I heard in the streets, and I'm like, oh man, they put this on TV. That's tight. So I really like that approach. I think shows should be open to new artists instead of just going with the trendy thing. I feel like there's a world of music. You guys can think of all the music that you've heard, and there's unheard music times like I don't know, a million. I guess music is so infinite. There's so many songs we haven't heard. So I just think everybody should be open to something new that might even fit better than what's trending.
Jen, Adele, from the music supervision side, what would you guys like to see? I mean, obviously you're both dealing with a lot of demand, right? It's a lot of demand for hip hop in particular. What would you like to see on the seller's side? How would you like to see that progress?
Wow, that's tough. In a perfect world, we all find a way to meet in the middle a little bit more. And it's very challenging on this side of the fence to not only manage people's expectations, but have the people we do business with really listen and hear exactly what our needs are from just, a creative standpoint, a budgetary standpoint, and then the licensing aspect of it and all of the things that are involved in that. And I do think that things keep getting better because all of us have been in challenging situations and have had to have uncomfortable conversations enough that everybody's learning to work better with each other. But more than anything, I would just love to be able to see us all get to a better place a little bit more.
Adele, anything to add?
Well, I definitely, echoing what she's saying. And when we are in those challenging conversations, when we're trying to troubleshoot, it's because you usually get people who are responsive, but at times it seems like I'm almost trying to say, like, we're all trying to find a solution together. We're on your side as well. And finding with the transparency and everything with the splits, but also finding a great producer, because so many producers are really, king in hip hop. And when there's usually good producers on the track, the licensing side usually is, even if it's maybe not established yet, it usually is not a challenging experience for the most part.
It's a good point, because they're often in hip hop, by the standard, they usually have 50% of the song just being the producer, right? So that's half the battle on the publishing side. Gary, anything to add in between these sides?
No, I think everybody has really said it. I mean, I think that hip hop business community has become more sophisticated. Thank God. They're getting more they're realizing that you've got to take care of business if you're going to get paid and stay out of trouble. And so I'm finding my managers, my hip hop artists are becoming more sophisticated. They're realizing that this is real business. You have to be transparent. You have to take care of business. You have to be educated. And they want to be. There's a lot of myths about the hip hop community that it scares, I think, the supervision and the corporate America away. And it really shouldn't, because hip hop artists are just as responsible, just as honest, just as straightforward and hardworking as anybody else.
Well,
Man.
If I can just add to that point, because a lot of the people too, it's such a community, and you do hear the negativity, but it is a very supportive community. So I've gotten through so many tough clearances just by reaching out, and it's somebody's friend that they grew up with, or who've essentially connected the dots and are just wanting to make it work.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks to everybody on the panel. Appreciate it.